the purpose of this talk is to give college students like yourself an overview of HCI, human-computer interaction, as a field, and design just broadly as a field, and then really talk a lot about showing what kind of jobs you can get with an HCI and design degree. Many students and alumni wish they had heard at this talk at the very beginning of college, because all of this takes a lot of time to prepare. So this is why like COGS 1 is the perfect class to give this talk in. I give this talk in my other classes too, but I think the earlier we can reach students to think about these sorts of issues, the more effective it'll be. Big warning here, we're going to go through a lot of slides. There's a lot of dense text. This is not a good example of visual design or slide design. So like this is like very ironic because it's supposed to be like an HCI design talk, and it's like horribly designed, as you can see. But it's because I want to put a lot of content in here so that really you can use these slides as a reference guide. And we can post the slides on the course website, or if you just search for my website and stuff, people will find this talk. You can also just come talk to me afterwards. Okay, so we have actually a lot of HCI and design faculty and research staff at UCSD across many departments. So this is a website just listing a lot of our faculty and researchers. And you know, CogSci has a lot of the HCI and design faculty, but we have faculty spanning many departments and divisions here, and also dozens of students. About 30 grad students, 60 undergrads, just all in different areas and such. Many of them obviously in cognitive science. So HCI design is a really, really diverse and interdisciplinary field. So everyone you're going to meet will have their own take on it, which I think is a cool thing. So if you just ask, everybody you ask about HCI design, they're going to have somewhat of a different definition, but you should definitely just ask people what they mean by the field. So I'm going to try to cover the very basics that I think most people would probably agree on. So a bit of just terminology. So the term HCI is often used in academia and very academic or research settings. If you look in industry or corporate settings, it's often called something called UX, or user experience. The X stands for, I guess, the X in experience. It's usually called UX design or just design in general. You'll often see these terms kind of used interchangeably. So just think about this while we're going through the talk. Okay, so I think a good way to introduce what the field is to just kind of walk through what you might learn in a typical class. So this is what you might learn in a typical introductory, HCI 101 sort of class. Like we have several of these that we teach in the department, and we all follow pretty much the same sort of process. So here is a really, really high-level overview of the process of doing HCI design. So I'm just going to go through these one by one, starting from the top down to the bottom. So in the very beginning, you do what's called user research. You talk to potential users, you sketch out storyboards, you sketch out user personas. You're really trying to get at the question of what do people really need or want, right? What are people's real needs are. And then we start thinking about what should we consider starting to build as our prototypes, whether we're building an app or building a service or building some kind of a visual thing or an animation or thing. And then we move on to some kind of prototyping. So we prototype on paper on using these digital tools to answer how should we start to build it. And then we move on to more interactive prototypes. So thinking about, how should it look and feel? How should this service or this tool or this thing we're building look and feel? And then we do some kind of empirical science, right? We do user testing, we do deploy it online, we collect data. We really try to measure how well it works for people and then adjust and iterate. And then the final thing is you end up with some kind of, in many of our courses, we build a web application, we build kind of a website, we build a simple mobile app. Those are just the kind of medium that we typically do in kind of a computational field. But you can imagine if you're in mechanical engineering, your final thing is some kind of 3D printed design or a robot, or if you're in visual arts, it's some kind of installation or some kind of interactive piece, right? It's just, a lot of the stuff we do is, as computational people, we're building an app, right? We're basically building things that you run on your phone, or you're visiting your web browser that you're browsing. Okay, so here's what you kind of do. Here's the kind of activities that you typically do. I'm just kind of giving you a really high-level overview. So in the first phase, you basically observe potential users in their natural habitat. You do interviews, you do observations, you might do surveys. This is very anthropological, right? So this is very much doing kind of anthropology, doing kind of observational sort of studies. And this is a quote that was from the startup world, right? So there's this motto called "Make something people want," which is a common quote that people use when they're thinking about how do you develop startup or product ideas. And while that's good, someone actually scratched it out and instead of want, they said need, right? And which is really this important distinction, right? That you can ask people what they want, but really by observing people and how they work and how they do things, you actually get to see what they really need instead of just what they say they want, right? Like we all say we want some things, but we might actually need something different. The next step is that you can do prototypes, oftentimes on paper. You can make these what's called low fidelity prototypes. Here are some example here. There's some videos. You can just go to the slides when we post them. But like you can basically make cutouts of these user interfaces. This is kind of like a Gmail-like app, right? You kind of stare at this. It's kind of like an email app. You can imagine making these user interfaces on paper, moving them around, testing them with people. It's a very lightweight way to just get feedback on ideas, right? Without even writing any code or using any computer tools. This is a really kind of classic idea. And then you might use computer tools, right? You might use something like Adobe Illustrator, or if you're using more UI tools, there are tools like Sketch or Figma or Adobe XD, these kind of, vector drawing tools for making these digital prototypes. This is the first step, and then you might actually write some code, start writing some HTML or CSS code to start making it look better on a web page. And then you might do some experimental science, right? You get real people, you bring them to your lab, you do this kind of, very typical sort of kind of behavioral science studies. You have them use something on the computer in the app, you watch them, you measure things, or you can deploy online, right? Because these things are often online. You can deploy online, you can collect data and do data analysis on them. So very famously, this is really, really old by now, but this is the 2008 President Obama's first campaign. This was widely known for being the first campaign to really make use of online experimentation of user interfaces. So this is a typical kind of campaign page, right? Basically a landing page from the home page. And then there's basically just a call to action there. They just want you to put your email address in and just sign up so that you can receive their newsletters and basically solicit donations, right? So they basically had various design ideas for what picture do we put here, and then what buttons do we put, right? What should we say here to get people to sign up, right? So how do we design this? So they would just launch various experiments where they would launch different versions of the site to maybe different people and then show different variations. And then because it's all online, they can measure all the data about how many people go to the page, how often they stay on the page, how many people actually end up clicking and setting their email address and stuff. So very famously, they iterated a bunch and they ended up with this successful design, which is actually the logo is the slogan also they experimented with, right? So they experiment with slogan changes, with picture changes, and with the button changes. So these sorts of changes were reportedly found to have, to just bring in, this news story was, $60 million and more in campaign donations as they were testing this. So this stuff is so much taken for granted today, right? Like everything you're using now, like if you're going on Amazon to shop, basically every website you're using is constantly running user interface experiments on all of this constantly, which is why it's kind of annoying sometimes, right? Because you're going to a website and something looks different. It's because you're part of an experiment. And it's, we can talk about all this offline, but we're all part of online experiments all the time, and we're not really aware of it, which raises many ethical issues, but that's just what we do nowadays in 2019, and we're using all these apps online. But this is happening all the time. And then finally, you're building something to ship. So Steve Jobs famously said, real artists ship, which is kind of a quote that's kind of alluded to this idea that, yes, you could be the best designer, the best artist in the world. You could, make these things that look awesome and are just amazing. But if you're not actually shipping things that actually go in the world, then it doesn't really matter, right? Because no one actually sees what you do. So products are never done, right? They're just, they're just shipped and released. Okay, so with that kind of background set for what the field of HCI design is based on, what we have in our intro classes. This is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the talk. So I'm going to talk about kinds of HCI or UX or design jobs, how to get one out of college, and then a final note about, what about graduate school after college. Okay, so let's start with kinds of HCI UX design jobs. So I made this talk by consulting with people, many of which are UCSD alum, who have recently worked in top design jobs. This is why it's a really fun talk to put together. And as you'll see, hopefully, if y'all enjoy this talk and go on to have a career in this, hopefully you can contribute back to this talk in the future as well. And we keep on improving it over time. So they've worked in, various kind of tech companies, education companies, Qualcomm's right here. Just all the kind of typical kind of large companies that have design or user-facing work, right? And people work in these jobs and way more in different sectors as well. There's a bunch of people that are credited here. So all of these insights are theirs, right? Basically, it's just an aggregation of their insights. I've just kind of put it together, right? So, the disclaimer is that, this is just my interpretation of their insights. But, as you can see, this talk was actually very much put together in a very HCI user-centered way, right? So instead of just me sitting here in front of the PowerPoint and just like making up something, I actually went out to talk to people who actually do this stuff for real, and then we collected their insights together and we distilled it into a talk. So it's a very meta thing. So, and again, hopefully in the future I can call on you to add your insights into this to keep it up to date, because one of the themes here, as you'll see, is that this field is so fast changing and fast moving that like every few years things just change, like totally, right? I mean, things just change so fast in the field of user interfaces and technology and design and stuff that talks like these have to constantly be refreshed to keep up to date. They have to just be constantly refreshed. It's a constant challenge, but it also makes it really exciting. Okay, so one slide summary. So if you're going to fall asleep or leave to get breakfast or food, or you want to take a picture, just this is the only slide. If you internalize this slide, you're basically ahead of 99.999% of your peers. So here's one slide summary. If you want to get a job in this field, one, you want to build up a design portfolio. Then you want to lean hard on your personal and alumni connections. And then finally, get a design internship while you're still in college. There's a bunch of fine print down here. Again, it's mostly for slides to read on the slides, but the center is the main message. So portfolio, connections, internship. So let's just start with zooming out of what kind of jobs are even available in this field, right? And it turns out that conveniently the jobs match what you learn in your intro HCI and design courses. So once again, this was the typical HCI and design course, right? Like all the stages that you go through in this design process in your course, and the kinds of questions you're answering at each stage of development. And if you actually look at this, and you think to yourself, I might be interested in this stage up here. This is kind of cool. I like to observe people and talk to people. Or you're like, oh, I really like to code and build apps. Or I really like to do data science and deployment data analysis. Or I really like to do visual design and like make visual mock-ups and stuff. That's cool because there's a job for you, right? So here are some kind of typical types of job titles that allow you to do this. So in the earlier phases, people are often called UX researchers. So UX, again, stands for user experience, or PMs, or product managers, or project managers. UX or product designers usually do this kind of middle phase of prototyping. Visual designers are ones who do, specialize in making the visuals and colors and layouts and everything. In the middle, this kind of interactive prototypes, there's a lot of kind of different kinds of roles called interaction designers and such. UX researchers do a bunch of the testing. Data scientists are now used a lot in industry to do these online experiments, especially at scale. And then finally, to be coding the apps, they're often called just software engineers or product engineers, front-end software developers, web developers, mobile developers. So these are the people who are actually coding at the final product. So there's a huge range of job roles that allow you to kind of focus on one end, on some parts of the spectrum. Okay, so big disclaimer on job titles. So they can be really confusing because different companies called similar jobs with different names. And like I mentioned a few slides ago, these names change really fast. So like all these industry trends just change really fast. So the names and like conventions all just like change all the time. So basically the only reliable way is just to read the job descriptions and ask companies what they're really looking for, right? Like ask them like, what are the real qualifications for this job? What are you really looking for? Because like new buzzwords are going to come up every year, and like, you know, something's going to be called something this year or next year and it means something different. This is from 2013, so this is already fairly old by now, but just gives you an idea of just the confusion of this. You're not supposed to read all the text. There's a lot of text. But again, this is all in the PDF for you to see. But like these are just like hundreds of job roles in real companies that have to do with HCI or UX or design. I mean, I know you can't read many of them because they're small, but look, there's a bunch of UX things, right? There are just so many different kinds of roles. And it's just really confusing because if you're, say, in a research, you know, you're doing a PhD, you're doing research, or you're doing a computer science degree and you're doing a software development role, they're called pretty much, you know, one thing, right? You're a software developer, a software engineer. But like when you're doing design or user experience or HCI, there's just so many different roles that actually mean pretty much the same thing. If you like Venn diagrams, here are some scary ones. Again, you're not supposed to be able to read this. The whole point of me showing this is to show how confusing it is. So, you know, these are just like different names for different kinds of design and like how they overlap with different fields. It's actually kind of interesting if you just stare at this. But basically, let's just show this is really confusing. There are just so many different overlapping circles, and the boundaries are really fuzzy and everything. So I just want to basically give a, you know, overall gestalt idea that this is all very confusing, and it's okay. All right, so here's like my attempt to really simplify all of these Venn diagrams and list into like one slide. So this is ultra simplified, but here we go. So UX researchers are ones who do need finding, user testing, experiments, like really finding out what people are needing. They often have master's or PhD degrees. They often have graduate level degrees because of more of this kind of research methods background. Product managers oftentimes do need finding again, and also do a lot of team coordination, a lot of kind of management of the team and project. UX or interaction or product designers, I describe them as making non-code prototypes. So these are the people who are making the prototypes, but they're not coding. So you're not expected to write code. You're expected to use basically graphical tools on the computer. You know, basically if you've used something like Adobe Photoshop or Illustrator, you're using tools like that, but more specialized for the design world. Or if you've done like 3D CAD tools and stuff, same idea. This is, I think, the most common type of jobs for new college grads. So most people who want to do a UX or design or HCI job out of undergrad will be trying to go for these UX interaction product designer jobs. This is like the most common one. There's also more emerging kind of newer terms that I haven't heard as much, but people apparently say that these exist. Again, this slide deck was made from real people who are actually working on this. So these terms called architects or prototypers, and they're these kind of hybrid roles where you're doing prototyping, but you're also starting to do some coding, right? So they want people with some kind of computational background to start doing some of the coding. And this hybrid role is can be. I think this has a lot of promise. So, you know, if you can do design and you can do some programming, you don't have to be like the most experienced programmer in the world, but if you can do some of it, I think it really helps. And then there's visual designers, more specialized fields, right? If you're from an art school or art school background, you do that. Data scientists are ones who analyze a lot of the data from these experiments. Often they hire out of PhD nowadays, but increasingly there are data science master's programs, and also here, especially, there are undergrad programs, minors, and majors springing up. So I think the data science roles will start evolving a lot in the coming years as more degrees are being offered, but they started out being very PhD focused. Then there are front-end developers, right, or just general web developers, software developers, and those are people who actually write the production code. Bunch of fine print here you can read on the slides later. Okay, so second part, how do you get one of these jobs right out of college? So this is really meant for people who are like yourselves, right? You're in college now, and you potentially want to work in this field and get one of these jobs. Okay, so this was my same one slide as before, right? Portfolio, connections, and internship. So ideally, this is how it should work. So the equation here is you have a portfolio and you add connections to that. So portfolio plus connections leads to internship, and the internships lead to full-time job opportunity. So this is like a highly idealized flow of how things should work. Let's start with the portfolio. Like, this is probably the most fundamental or the base part, right? Because everything starts with that. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on that. And this is the thing that you can start thinking about like right now, because as you can tell, it will take time to build. So here's the basics of portfolio. So basically what a portfolio is that it's just a personal website. So like if you don't have a personal website yet, it's pretty easy to start one up now. There are many services that you can just pay for to just host a website. There's, nowadays in 2019, there's actually really many easy ways, both free and paid, for you to just create a website without even writing any code and just like register a domain name. Usually just using your name or some version of your name is just the easiest. Just keep it simple. Then what you want to put in this portfolio are class projects with design components. So many of our CogSci HCI classes have design and project components. That's usually the first part of people's portfolios because that's how people get into the field. And then you want to look beyond class projects, right? So you want to maybe volunteer to help with on-campus groups. If you have friends with projects, if you have friends who are maybe starting companies or working in some kind of organization, just volunteer to help them out, right? If people you're living with, your dorm mates, your apartment mates, you have to really be resourceful about finding this sort of work, right? Because there's not like a curriculum of like, oh, you just take these classes and just do the work. We do have classes that can get you started with class projects, but you really want to go kind of above and beyond outside. So another just kind of more advice, just look beyond building standard websites or mobile apps and stuff. So just think about, building a portfolio. You can make posters, for events, art pieces, event flyers, marketing slides, if you have friends who are doing, marketing or business stuff and they need help with design for their slides. These are all just kind of things to think about, right? At first, when you're just starting about building a design portfolio, you just want to like have raw materials to put into it. And it doesn't matter what yet because you just want to start building up something. Another thing you can do is there are like design contests. They're sometimes called design sprints or hackathons, design challenges or contests. Sometimes these are online. Sometimes these are like in person locally, like organizations or meetups would have those. They're just, again, just events that give you a prompt or give you some motivation. Sometimes companies sponsor a hackathon or sponsor a challenge and stuff. Again, it's just to get you to like do something with some kind of structure. All right, you can do this all on your own, but it's nice to have structure. You can also work part-time, right? So if you can, if you're doing part-time work, if you can get paid work, that's awesome, right? Because you get paid while you're in school. If you can work as a freelance designer for, a local company that might want to hire students to do some things. If you have friends with startups that they want to just hire you part-time on an hourly basis. A lot of this is just to build up experience, right? So other ideas, so UCSD, we have the basement, we have the startup accelerator, the Rady, the business school also have these kind of startup kinds of things as well that people have kind of gotten involved in. And just think about other student groups. And again, once you get a design internship, you can try to put that in your portfolio, try to write about that as much as possible. And then you want to look at your friends and alumni's portfolios and look at their resumes, look at their LinkedIn pages, basically just look at theirs as examples of how to make yours. And this is a theme that will come up throughout this talk, is that because this field changes so fast, like, you don't, even the people who helped me with this talk, they got jobs 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I mean, like, their LinkedIn pages or portfolios or resumes, like, the words on there are just in a different language, right? Like it's really, things have to be so recent. So like the most powerful thing you can do here is to find people who are like a year ahead of you, 2 years ahead of you, 3 years ahead of you, and look at what they did because they're the most up to date, right? Like once people are many, many years removed, the field just has evolved and changed so fast. So just, and all these things are public. The great thing about all these portfolios and resumes and like the GitHub profiles and the LinkedIn pages is that they're all public by definition, right? By definition, people put them up on the web so that companies can find them, other people can find them. So there's many, many good examples that you can find. Okay, so I'll give you an example right now. So again, there's a link here for more advice here that one of my TAs gave. So this is David Wu. He's one of my TAs for one of my HCI courses. And here's an example of his portfolio. So a design portfolio is basically a website. And the website just has a short intro. So he just has a little short intro here of who he is. Keep it really short, basically. And a series of what's called case studies. So here's his website. Basically, I zoomed out, right? So there's, again, you don't need to read the text. So basically, there's a short intro, it's a little long here, and then there's just like a series of projects that he's done. So this is a Lyft, this is an internship with the company Lyft, this is another internship, and this is a class project. So internship, class project. So let's focus on this class project down here. And so every one is just kind of a thumbnail of what they've done, and then when you click on it, it goes to a whole page. So a case study, this is what I teach in my classes. A case study is basically just a single long web page. Think about it as like a long blog post, right? And this web page, this is David's for his class project. So I mean, it's just scrolling, right? So again, you don't need to read it, but basically start on top, scroll, scroll, scroll. What this web page is, it's a web page of the design process. Remember, like in the class project, you had the like 8 stages or whatever. This is basically those stages just laid out as a story that he can explain, saying, here's the problem, here's the space, here we did our user interviews, here we started prototyping, we started making some mock-ups, we started making some paper things, we did some user testing, we did some more testing, blah, 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 and I mean, it keeps going on and on. And the idea here is that this is what people are going to look at. Like, this is the main thing. And you know, in my classes, we basically teach you how to make one of these things, because this is the end product people are really looking for. Right? I mean, yes, you know, having a landing page is great. You know, having a web page, you know, about yourself, you can put your resume in there. That's great. And having the project listed is great. But really, what's really going to get you the job is how you write these case studies right here. And this is the core of your portfolio. So if he had, so hypothetically, you know, well, this is actually real, hypothetically. So with the class project, with this case study, this is how he was able to get his product design internship at the company Lyft. And, you know, of course, it's good if you have other projects, or it's good if you have more experience and you're going to be more competitive on the job market. But my TAs have shown that even starting out with a class project, if you write it up well, that could get your foot in the door as your first internship. And then and then you build up more, right? You get your foot in the door, and then you do internship, and then you have more internships listed on there. And these projects are more real world because you're working with real companies and such. But it successfully happens, right? This can happen if you write it up well. But here's one of the most common, I guess, misconceptions or such, or things to avoid, is that, you know, this is his final design, like his final product for the class project, right? So, you know, there's a bunch of screenshots. You can imagine making a video or a demo, or even like having a working app or something, right? So imagine, like, you know, if people think about, oh, what's a portfolio? I just need to show off my projects, right? I got to show off my projects. What's a project I did for class? We made an app to help people do X, and then let's show the app. It's great. We showed the app. Here's some screenshots. Here's the video. Here's a cool demo of it working. Maybe if you're actually coding it, you actually show the real thing, right? Like, here's a real working app that like uses Google Maps or your location or whatever. And great, it's really impressive. It actually works. It's really cool, right? It works. It's great. And your portfolio piece, like for that project, is here's my final result, right? So if you do that, you know, no internship, no job. So why is that? So you're like, well, that's weird. I showed a thing, it worked, it's real, you know, I made it, I coded it up, it's real. You know, how come I can't get a job from this? I'm not saying this is bad. This is still better than not having it, right? Showing your final product is better than not having a project. But you're going to be much less competitive than people who show process, because basically what people are hiring you for when you're doing these UX or design internships is they don't care what you made. They care the process you went through and the idea that you can actually go through this design process. So like, this is what you need and not that. So the way I put it, I'll put it in a few slides later, but here's some more advanced things about portfolios just for reference. So justify and critique your own process is the most important thing. So like, this is, the word process shows up everywhere in this talk. Basically, you want to justify what you did, how you did it, why you made each design decision, and why it matters in the end. Your project is really just a vehicle for you to tell a story about what you did in the process. This is also really important for dispelling the myth that design is only about visuals or aesthetics or making stuff look good. So the word design is very overloaded, right? It's a very colloquial word. And when people, if you just like go up to someone at Starbucks or on the street and you ask them about design, they'll be like, oh yeah, like people who make our logos or banners or make, you know, art or stuff. And like, yeah, that's one definition of it. But a more general definition of design is really about making stuff that benefits real users, right? It's actually about making stuff that benefits real people and not just about aesthetics, right? I mean, visuals are obviously important, but you know, the process is way more important than that. So in order to do this, you have to be able to look at your project and explain why you designed it that way. And that now you can hopefully see why this is so important to have a case study that writes out your process. You also want to have a compelling and personal point of view that makes your work stand out. This is a little bit more abstract, but I'm just going to put it here for reference. But basically, you want to make this case study, or at least introduce it with something that is unique to you, right? It's like, why did you do this project, right? It wasn't just because someone handed it to you. Like, you were personally motivated because you really identify with this user population, or you have a parent, you have grandparents or parents or friends who have a need for this sort of product, and you're motivated to do this, or you have some kind of a unique personal background. Again, this is all just about telling your own story. Fine print down here. So employers have seen the same class projects over and over again, so you want to go beyond those. So again, even if you're doing a class project, ideally in an advanced mode, you want to show that there's some kind of personal touch to it that's not just something that anyone could have done, right? It's something that's unique to you. More advanced things, it's often better to show how you improved an existing real-world product rather than making your own from scratch. So in fact, in my intro class, our project is to improve an existing product, and we're not having students design everything from scratch, because that's basically what you do in the real world, right? Like when you're in a company, you're much, much more likely to be extending an existing product, right? No one's going to hire you to be like, let's just make a new thing from scratch, right? Whereas if you think about when you're doing class projects or hobby projects, you're often trying to make something on your own from scratch. And I would encourage you to think about extending or improving something that already exists, because that's what people are actually doing in the real world. In your portfolio, highlight the most relevant projects for your job role. So if you want to focus on a certain part of the design process, just make those more clear. Example portfolios, you can even just search these on Google. So there's a site called Cofolios and Bestfolios. They're pretty self-explanatory on search. If you search for those are collections of people's portfolios they've just submitted. So you can actually just see people's case studies and portfolios, and there'll be much more links later. Okay, so here's like the big slide here, is that companies don't really care what exactly you made for your portfolio projects, right? They just want to see that you've been engaging in a thoughtful and user-centered design process, so you can do the same for them if they hire you, right? This is what I was saying earlier. That like the exact thing that you made is not as important as showing how you made it, right? The process critique. This is not as important as this, right? That is the most important thing, is showing how you did it. Of course, it helps if you have a good idea, right? Like, having all else being equal, a better idea, a more original idea is going to be better. Not just because the final product is better, but a better idea or a more personally motivated idea is better because you can tell a better story about it, right? Because you're going to be motivated to do the process better if you have a more original and more interesting idea, and one that goes with your point of view and personal style and stuff. Okay, so remember to keep that in mind, right? That it's not really about exactly what you made, it's about how you made it. Okay, so let's talk about, let's continue on. So that was portfolio. That's probably like the most important part to start with, because with that, that's the basis that you're going to form everything with. So like thinking about class projects, thinking about other projects you can do, and how you can shape that into a portfolio piece. Okay, connections is the second part. So basically, emailing alumni is one of the best strategies, especially recent alumni. LinkedIn is a really good place to look people, email them, or message them on LinkedIn. You can easily do searches for UCSD alumni at various companies. You can filter by them. Besides alumni, just friends, family, dorm mates, instructors, TAs, basically anybody. Like, the thing with, this whole like personal connections and job connections thing, it's like, basically everything is fair game, right? Like if you're in a class, right, you have to basically do the stuff in the class, right? Like you have to, you do your homework, and there's like, a policy, you got to do the homework yourself, or like you have to, obviously for exams, like there are rules, right? You have to take the test yourself. You can't ask for help. You can't like search online for the answers. But like when it's your like life and job, like anything goes, right? Like anything goes, right? I mean, emailing people, talking to people that that they might know, your bosses from prior jobs or internships, even if they might not work in a field that you're directly working, like any job you have, right? Like you'd be surprised, right? And you're like, oh, I just worked in this place, has nothing to do with what I want to do for my career. Just talk to them, right? If you get along with them, just talk to them. They might have friends who are like, oh yeah, I have a friend who works in the field, or like my brother's cousin-in-law or whatever works in this field and stuff. And you just never know until you talk to them. So just talk to anybody you can about this. Most jobs are obtained via referrals from connections. So this is a really important point to hammer home, that if you can get a referral from someone at a company or at a particular place, you drastically increase your chances of getting an interview. Because if you don't have a referral, you're basically applying online, right? You're just sending your resume online, and like anyone can send their resume online, right? I mean, like 100,000 people, anybody on the internet can just start sending their resumes online, but many fewer people can get a referral into the company. So that drastically increases your odds. Another thing, this is one of my friends said this is great, is they take advantage of your .edu student email address. This is like a huge thing. So both your .edu email address and also the fact that you're a student, just tell them you're a student, that also gets you past like 500,000 filters, because once you are no longer a student and you have, some, random Gmail address or Yahoo or whatever, and you're cold emailing people, you're just like one of like 300 million people in this country who are just like emailing people online or messaging people online, right? But if you're a student, you have this edu address at UCSD, like people just automatically like, oh yeah, like I want to help students out. Like it's way much more advantage to say that you're a student, you have edu address, rather than like I'm just some random person from the internet who's messaging you. Also, another way to use your personal connections is as critique, right? Have them look over your portfolio, your resume, your LinkedIn page, your cover letters, anything. Basically, especially if they're from these companies, they can easily tell. They're like, oh yeah, like you should really update this page or change this thing. Like they'll be able to tell because they work in the field, right? Okay, so the hope is with this portfolio and these connections, you can hopefully get some internships. So the basic interview prep for these design internships, again, this is all just repeating what I said before, is walk through your portfolio, right? So the whole point of having a portfolio with a case study is that you can walk through it, and you'll walk through it with the interviewer. So just grab some friends and just explain your case studies to them, right? Literally just have them read over it, or just go and have them sit in front of your laptop and scroll through it and say, here's what I did for this part, here's why I did it, and then have them ask you questions. There's a lot of resources online I'll link to. Ideally, you want to be able to put your internship work in there. If you can't get internships, which is, it's getting more and more common, especially if you're early on, right? Because these internships, especially at, kind of top companies, are really competitive to get. If you can't get like an internship in these companies, it's fine. Like, don't stress about it, right? So spend your summers building up your portfolio in any way that you can, right? So, don't stress about it. This happens to a lot of people, especially if you're just starting out. But in a way, it's kind of a blessing in disguise, because then you actually have a lot of time to think about how to structure these projects. This is one of my favorite stories that one of my TAs from my class told yesterday in class. So he spent a summer as a DoorDash food delivery driver, right? So DoorDash is a common food delivery app, right? So he spent a summer just delivering food for DoorDash because he needed a job. So he made some money, and then he wrote a case study redesigning the DoorDash driver app. Right, so that was brilliant, right? So he spent a whole summer, trying to use the driver app to like deliver food, and like actually these services, whether it's DoorDash or delivery services, they are notorious. The driver apps or the apps for the workers are notoriously bad, right? They're notoriously bad because no one pays attention to them, because all the best people are working on the customer apps, right? So like if you're doing Lyft or Uber or DoorDash or Postmates or whatever, the customer experience is the one they're optimizing for, right? They want those customer apps to be like super nice and polished and stuff. And then the poor drivers, or like the people who have to make the food and like work at the restaurants, those apps are just terrible. Like they're just terrible because they don't put all the best people on it. So because he had to work as a delivery driver, he had to use the apps and like go through all the terribleness of those apps. And then he thought about ideas for how could we make this better. And this is brilliant because he was basically doing user research on himself all summer while actually having a job and working as well, right? So I thought that was just a brilliant use of his summer. Okay, so let's do the final part about looking for a full-time job. So ideally, you can get some internships and such. And looking for a full-time job is a full-time job, and this is going to be in your last year of college and stuff. And this is a challenging process, right? So I would just apply broadly, and don't worry if you don't exactly match the job description. It's free to apply. Obviously, it's good to have referrals, but even at companies you don't have referrals, just do your best and just apply as broadly as you can, because again, these job descriptions and titles are just ambiguous and such. So just apply. And don't have your heart set on any one place. Successful applicants apply to dozens of places. The fine print there is keep track of it in a spreadsheet, right? Just keep track of all your applications. people just apply to lots of places, and it's just kind of part of the process. But that said, yes, apply broadly, apply to a lot of places, and you have to send your stuff online for a lot of things. But that said, do everything you can to get an employee at each company to give you a referral or to send your name or resume to recruiters. Like, just do everything you can to do that. I know you're not going to be able to do that with every company, right? Because people routinely apply to dozens of companies. You're not going to know someone at all the companies and stuff. So at a few of them, if you do, that's great. And because it's the fact that most of these job openings prioritize referrals, like above all else. So, again, this is the, connections and stuff, right? It's all fair game. Like, do everything you can to do this and email people, message people. And the worst thing that happens is that they don't respond to you because they just, have too many emails. That's fine. Like, it's not a bad thing to email people, right? Like, if they don't respond to you, that's okay. I mean, other people might. Okay, so some ideas about company size. So this is pretty typical. So in general, if you work at a smaller company, you have more varied and diverse roles, right? So N equals 1 is kind of you're working for yourself, you're independent, you're a freelance designer. The plus there is you have a lot of flexibility, but there's the minus is a lot of uncertainty, right? You're really looking for work, right? You're looking for contract work all the time. Some people thrive in that environment, but it's pretty hard, right? Because you're basically independent. You have to take care of everything yourself. A tiny startup, there's variety, there's growth opportunities if the startup does well, but there's also uncertainty. The minus also is uncertainty, right? So a smallish design agency, these are more niche design agencies. They're hard jobs to get because they're small, but those, people working at those places are often really happy because they can work directly with clients. They have a company they work for, but it's fairly small and they actually get to do really core design work. But those jobs are very selective, right? These design agencies are extremely, extremely selective. Most common are these in-house designers at a big company, right? So you're working at a big technology company or companies in other sectors. You're a regular employee of a bigger company, and you have a more fixed role, right? So usually you're doing one part of that design process. Whereas if you're a freelancer or you're working at a small company, you can do many different parts, right? More fine print. Okay. Another thing I'd encourage you to do is to look beyond the usual tech companies, right? So especially if you're looking online and looking at people's portfolios, and the most high profile people are working at these kind of big technology or app companies and such. But the thing is, I think there's so many different industries that have a need for design work that aren't the most newsworthy ones that are all in the news, right? So here's some examples of sectors. So retail and logistics, right? Kind of back end retail and logistics that basically powers all of our economy. Government IT. So a lot of agencies contract with the government in various fields. It doesn't, it's not in the news and everything. It's all behind the scenes. Contractors, again, people working in the government. Science labs occasionally have, designy user research sort of roles or other kinds of user-facing roles. Nonprofits, social good kind of nonprofits and such. And the fine print down here I said is that HCI UX design skills are in demand, but those sectors can't attract the most experienced designers. So you can make a big impact as a new hire. Again, this is a challenge, right? Because these sectors might not have as much of a design or HCI culture, but if there are people there that are open to this and they hire you, you can actually have a really big impact, right? Because if you are one of 1,000 designers at a tech company, you're doing a very fixed thing. But you could make a big impact on these things. And also looking beyond the typical roles is important because these, big company typical roles are really competitive to get. So again, just applying broadly is really important, especially for your first job, right? You just want to get a job and get something on your resume and build that up. Another thing is to look beyond pure design jobs, right? So this is just one data point, right? So, a few years ago, it's already old. Most designers said that coding was an important skill, and very informal survey, in 2005, 10 years earlier, very few would have said so. And this is something that has changed a lot in the field in the last, I would say, decade. Is that in the old days, right, design and coding or engineering was not that related at all, right? Designers were more associated with artists, but now designers are very much integrated with engineering and coding and programming. So the ideal ratio at a company is you have one designer for every, say, 5 programmers or 5 engineers. But in reality, there's probably only one designer for every 10 to 30 programmers. In reality, the bleak reality is that there aren't that many pure design jobs, right? Because you really don't need 20 people to be doing a design, right? You probably only need one person to do that thing. And you need a lot more people to do programming and deployment and all the engineering work. That's just a lot more labor intensive. So Because of that, a good adjacent role is a front-end software developer, web developer, mobile developer. So front-end basically means you're doing user-facing parts, like kind of front user-facing parts, like user interfaces and interactions and stuff, and you're writing code. Here, what I said is build up your design portfolio on the side while working, and then you can learn from designers on your team, like the one designer on your team, and then maybe you can transition to more design role later. Another reason why doing a front end or software development thing may be good is that many places still don't value design, but they do value programming, right? This is much more well known. So it's your chance to kind of sneak this design thinking ideas into your workplace as a front end developer. So I think like I mentioned earlier, I think some of the people with a really compelling backgrounds nowadays are people who can do design and some front end software development, web programming, some coding. Okay. So we're getting near that. So what if you can't find a full-time job right away? So again, the job market, both for internships and for full-time, is getting more and more competitive, right? And like a lot of people more and more people are majoring in HCI and design for many schools, and it's just really competitive to get a job. So again, don't panic. One idea is do freelance or these contract jobs, right? You can do more of these kind of independent jobs part-time. The reason why you do this is to make some money, obviously, and also to build up your portfolio, right? And connections, right? So the more jobs you can do that's relevant, anything that you can do, just you can put in your portfolio. And also you can use those to build up connections, because those are going to be people that can refer you to future jobs. I know that the beginning of your career is the hardest part, I think, just because, how do you get started, right? There are tens of thousands of students here on this campus, and, there are hundreds of campuses, in the US alone, right? And every year, think about every year, there are hundreds of thousands of college students graduating, wanting to get these junior entry-level jobs, and it's really competitive. So if you can't get something full-time right away, think about doing kind of more freelance work and stuff. It is a challenge, of course, but even my TA's example, which I love, the DoorDash example, which I love, was that like even if you have to do something that's not directly design related. The nice thing about this HCI and design as a field is that it permeates everything we do, right? Like, he worked as a DoorDash driver. We have students who drive other services and stuff. Like every facet of our lives are ruled by these mobile phones and computers and apps and technology. So like, I think that there's an opportunity for anything you do to relate to your portfolio, right? If you're doing something in healthcare, you're volunteering in a nursing home to take care of the elderly, and you look at the technological implications there. Like, there are just so many sectors. Like going back to here, there are just so many sectors that I think healthcare is actually a really good thing I should put in here too. There are so many sectors where I changed my slide right now, where there are just opportunities. Can I even spell? Healthcare IT is huge, huge, huge. There are just so many sectors where you have such an important role of technology, but where technology has just not been valued as much. So I think healthcare is actually going to be this is something that I would bet on in the coming decades, right? I mean, people are living longer, lives, lifespans are getting longer, and everyone is connected online. And if you think about, even if you don't interact with a lot of healthcare IT, I bet your parents do, right? People getting at your parents' age, getting into their 40s, 50s, and 60s, like everybody's going to collide with healthcare IT. Like everyone's going to collide with it, right? Because we're all going to get old and have ailments of some sort. And you will find that the more you interact with this, the more you realize, holy cow, like these apps and these information systems, these services, like they are literally decades old. And they're just, there are people who are trying to figure out how to modernize them. So if you're working in this field, I think you can find really interesting opportunities to do projects that you can propose better ideas for that. So again, just broadly thinking laterally, any kind of job you can get. I would just say, even if it's not a design job, like if you're just working in some kind of job, you can, and you're interested in going into this field, you can find some way. To make it work, and that's why I think I'm really excited about the field, because it really permeates. Anything that we do with technology, this will be relevant for. Okay, final part. What about grad school? Okay, so there are two major kinds of graduate school programs they might be thinking about. So the first one is a master's program, so a master's degree in HCI or design or related field. So let's talk about that first. So master's programs are typically 1 to 2 years. You're typically paying tuition. Typically, there's not that much financial aid, right? You're basically paying the full tuition. You can get a loan and stuff, but they're pretty expensive, especially at a private school. So just think about that. So I would say no if you already have a good portfolio of internships, right? Like, so my TAs, my TAs who TAs for my class, they're able to get good jobs right out of college, out of undergrad, no problem, because they have the portfolios, the case studies, everything. So no need for a graduate program. No if you can already get a job from college. Right? If you're already getting a job that you need, there's no reason for another degree. Maybe if your major is far away from HCI and design, this typically happens. I get people who, we have a lot of people who switch into COGS HCI from different majors. They were like pre-med before, they were a bio major, and then they take COGS 1, they're like, oh, I really want to do this, and forget med school. And my parents are gonna be mad because I'm not gonna be in med school, but this is way more exciting. So if your major is far away, maybe a master's would help, because then at least your most advanced degree says master's in HCI or design. So that might help you on the job market instead of saying you have another degree that's not in HCI. Maybe if you want to be a teacher, so if you want to teach at design schools, usually you need at least a master's level degree to be an instructor at a design institute. Yes, if you don't have a short portfolio yet, I think if you can't afford it, right? If you can't afford it, I think a master's degree in a good program will allow you to do more of these class projects, these internship projects and stuff to build up a portfolio. It's just another way to do that, right? You don't have to, right? You can do it all yourself, but the nice thing about a school setting is that in a good program, it gives you that structure. If you can afford it, right? It's time, it's tuition, it's money, it's a financial decision. It's ultimately, I view master's programs as a purchasing decision, right? I mean, it costs as much as a luxury car, basically, right? So you're like, if you can afford that, if you can afford that, that tens of thousands of dollars, and you think it's worth it, but it's not a decision you should take lightly. I think it's a very serious decision to do. So you shouldn't just default into it. Yes, if you want to be a UX researcher, more and more these UX research roles, they probably require a master's or above degree. Okay, so you go to graduate school to get a PhD degree in HCI or design-related fields. So this slide should just be like a big no. The first page is a giant no. No, but seriously, no if you're aiming for most design-related jobs, right? So this is not a degree. So a PhD degree is usually 5 to 7 years. You're usually paid a stipend, right? You're a teaching assistant, you're a research assistant. It is a job, right? So a PhD degree, it's very different than a master's. So, a master's degree is 1 or 2 years, you're paying tuition. It's basically like an undergrad degree. You're paying as much as you're paying for an expensive Tesla car, and a year later you get like a diploma. Basically, that's what a master's degree is. A PhD degree is kind of like a job that you're training to be a researcher. It's a 5 to 7 year job. You're getting paid a small salary. You're basically being paid to teach and do research. So it's not really for most kinds of design-related jobs. You can get a PhD in that and go into the same design jobs, but you're basically not getting paid much more than you should have just gone directly from a bachelor's. Maybe if you want to be a UX researcher, maybe, although you might be better off just doing a master's if you want to do UX research. Yes, if you want to be a university professor and do research and teaching at the university level, right? So the professors who gave talks here, we all have PhDs in related fields and stuff, and that's really what you need for a university level research and teaching job. Yes, if you want to be a research scientist, this is a confusing name. So research scientists are not UX researchers. So research scientists are basically academic or applied researchers, right? So what research scientists do is they do science, they do experiments, they write papers, they try to contribute to the research literature. They do very similar things the way professors and students, graduate students do. UX researchers are the ones who are doing research on the user experience, on the users to help improve the products, where the research scientist is much more about producing papers and patents and more general knowledge. So if you want to be in like research in academia or even in companies, you do need a PhD. And then yes, if you want to be a data scientist, I think this is changing because there's more master's data science programs, but in the old days, data scientists were hired out of PhD for the most part. Okay, so here's a recap of the talk, and I'll do a epic conclusion. So the recap is build up a design portfolio, right? Think about projects, class projects, internship projects, side projects. Think about writing up a case study, how to write up your process. Lean hard on your personal and alumni connections, and then get a design internship while you're in college. And again, many students and alumni wish they had learned what's in this talk at the very beginning of college. And now hopefully you can see why, right? Because this stuff does take a lot of time to prepare. This is why it's great to give this talk in Cogs 1. Because I'm not expecting you all to come out of this talk and make your portfolio or case study right away, but just thinking about it in the back of your head, right? Because you're like, yeah, maybe I'm interested in doing this, and it's good to start planning early. Okay, so parting thoughts. Final thing. I just put this in this talk last week. Build your own time machine. So this is, I think, more general than HCI or design. I think this will apply, for those of you in the audience who are you're majoring in something, other specialization, you don't care about HCI or design or UX at all, and you're aiming for a job in a whole other cog sci specialization, y'all can wake up now, because this is this is relevant for everybody. Okay, so what do I mean by building your own time machine? Okay, so here's what I mean by this. To travel into your possible future, proactively seek out people who are 3, 5, or up to 10 years ahead of you in life. Learn what they've done so far and what they think they should have done differently. So basically this means find the people who are a few years ahead of you. I mentioned this before, right? So I would say 3 is a good starting point. So those are recent alumni. 5 is really good also. So those people have already been working for a few years. They've kind of gotten into the flow of working in your field, right? Whether it's in HCI or design or in medicine or in neuroscience or in machine learning or data science or any other field. It doesn't matter what field you're in. It's everybody has peers who are a few years ahead of them. I would say up to 10. I wouldn't go more than 10 because, the world changes so fast, right? And also you probably don't know people that are 10 years ahead or more. But I would say 3 to 5 is the sweet spot there. So really think about who these people are. If they're older siblings, they're alumni in your student organization, they're people who lived in your dorm, in the college system, who've been involved in alumni events. Just think hard about anybody you know who might fit this bill. And just catch up with them and talk with them about what they've done so far in their life path and also in their career path, right? What decisions they made, and also what regrets they have and what they think they should have done differently and such. Now, everybody is going to have a very noisy signal here, right? Everyone is obviously just one data point. But if you do this with enough people, you're going to start finding patterns. And this is really cool because this is kind of you're able to do time travel, right? You're actually able to, it's like the movie Back to the Future. You're actually able to see wow, if I kind of do these things, I might be on this path, right? Of course, it's not guaranteed, right? They're different people, right? They're not you. It's not deterministic, but it's still better than not having that, right? So if you see enough people and you kind of build up this data in your head, you're oh, these people all kind of went down this way, but this is not really what I want to do, so I shouldn't do this. So maybe I should go down this way and such. And this is why it's really important. It's really important for this second slide, which is talking to these people will give you the superpower to make the decisions today that will create your best possible future. If you wait until you're their age, it will be much, much harder to alter their path because you don't want to turn into one of these people who are, you don't want to turn one of these people who are 5, 10 years ahead who are talking to you oh, wow, I really should have done this differently when I was in college. I really, really should have done this differently. Because by then, it's I don't want to say it's too late. It's never too late, right? But it's much harder to change things. This is something that's a universal thing. As you get older and farther ahead in your career, you're just more set on a certain path, and it's just much harder to change your path. It's possible, right? Anything's possible, right? And if given enough willpower and enough resources, anything's possible, but it's so much easier to change possible futures when you're starting out in college or in your first few jobs. Whereas 5 or 10 years later, it's just much harder. So that's also why I encourage people, when you're taking your first jobs out of college, it's fine to switch jobs after a while and stuff and to switch things around because in the very beginning, you're just so much more flexible than later on, right? I mean, this is something your parents tell you, but it is true. So just think about this, right? Just think about looking in your possible future by talking to people who are ahead of you. And this is probably the most practical or useful thing that you can have, right? So basically the implication here is that don't talk to me, right? Because I'm super old and out of touch and stuff. Don't talk to me about this stuff. Talk to the people who are 3, 5, 10 years ahead. And if you actually think about what Sun began this talk was made not by me, but by people who are basically these people, right? these are the people who made this talk. And that's why this talk needs to evolve, because if I give this exact same talk in 10 years, this stuff will all be out of date. So just think about looking ahead to the people who are a few years ahead of you and selectively finding those people about that. Okay, so summary. These are the sorts of UX or design jobs you can possibly get, and these are kind of the parts of the design phase that those go in. There's a lot of different kinds of jobs. There's a bunch of appendices. Again, the slides will be online. There's just a bunch of links that people have contributed over the years. There's a whole slide about product manager or PM jobs and stuff. And yeah, so this is the history. I've given this talk many times over the past three years or so. So in the remaining time I have, we are at 9 o'clock. In the remaining time I have, I'm happy to take questions and open it up for Q&A and stuff, and I can repeat the questions up here. So if you have questions, let's do it now. Yeah, so that's a good question. Yeah, the question in the back is, are we not supposed to include the final product? Are we supposed to just include the case study? Well, the final product is the final part of your case study, right? So the final product is in there, right? But it's just the last part, right? I mean, you should probably describe it up front. You should probably summarize it up front, right? And on your web page, the preview of every case study, you could have the final product shown. I think that's a cool idea. That, you know, if you have a little YouTube video or a little demo, the teaser trailer could be the final product, but you want to have the full thing too. Yeah, so it's not an either or. Yeah, you do have your final product, but it's part of the case study. And we had one up here. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was about, you know, you're really observant in that especially the class projects is that like they're usually team projects, right? Class projects and also internship projects. All these projects are team projects for the most part, right? Except if you're doing something totally by yourself. And the question was, you know, are you able to write up the whole case study because you didn't do personally probably all of it, right? And I would say the answer is yes, but you should talk about the parts you focused on, right? So you could say, you know, on David's class project here, let's see, computers. On the class project, it's actually interesting because I didn't get to show both of them, but both David and Rajiv, who are my two TAs for this one class, they worked on this class project together for another class. They worked on the same team project, right? Same class project with the third member, but they wrote up their own individual case studies on it, and they were both able to get jobs out of it. And I would say what happens is that you want to be honest up front. You want to say that the project was a team project. We had a team of 3, blah, blah, blah. And my role specifically was to focus on the whatever part. But I think it's okay to present the whole thing. And usually, you know, on these class projects, you know, I think if they work well, everyone is involved in more of the parts, right? You might be involved more than another, but it's not that like for a class project, it's not like you just sat there for 9 weeks and then you just did the 10th week's work, right? You are involved in all the work. It's just you're not as heavily involved. But I think that's fine. I mean, the research equivalent of this, right, the equivalent in academic research, as you've seen in reading these papers, is that a research paper has a few authors, right, the team project. And obviously not every author worked on every single part of the paper, but they're all kind of authors on the paper. So I think that's a great question. But you should be honest and say this was a team project and such. It's a great question. Yeah, so the question was, what's the best way to learn these web frameworks like Angular or Vue or React for building the web applications or mobile applications? It's a great question. I think, you know, a good starting point is the official tutorial pages on their web pages. It's often hard to find good resources because there are so many of these resources and it's really confusing. I would say that the official ones from their web page is probably the best starting point because you know, the organizations that maintain these frameworks they have an incentive to make their documentation good. And beyond that, I would even look into some paid courses that are, you know, there are these courses online that are, you know, $10 a month or whatever subscribed to. You know, the issue with these web framework things that there's so much information out there and it's a very varying quality. So it's actually really hard to find the best thing for you. I would just look for reviews or just start with the official ones and stuff. But it is a challenge. Yeah, it is a challenge. But you know, many things you can do without doing the coding part. But yeah, that's a good question. Do we have one in the middle there somewhere? Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, I'm about to sneeze. So, So the question was, many of these are design jobs, cognitive science is a major, how did that look in terms of those jobs? So practically what happens, I think it's the best major here for it. So, you're here now. So I think that cognitive science is the best major for it because we have this HCI specialization, right? So that your degree says cognitive science with an HCI specialization. We do have a design minor. That's at UCSD now, so you should look into that so that there is a minor in design, so you can have a cognitive science major and a design minor, which I think is kind of easy to get because a lot of those courses you're already taking for cog-sci. So there's a design minor. That said though, you're absolutely right. A lot of these job titles are design, but there aren't, if you ever actually think about it, like not many undergraduates have an undergraduate degree in design, right? Like it's very hard for me to name an undergraduate student with an undergraduate degree in design because those don't actually exist, right? They might exist at like these art schools, right? These kind of art schools might have a bachelor's in design or something, but those are actually not the people doing these. This is why the job titles are confusing, right? The people who go to these art schools or design schools, they might become visual designers or graphic designers, but they are not actually the one doing most of these jobs. So I guess a more general form of your question is what majors do people do that do these jobs? Here, I think cognitive science is the most common one. Typically, another one would be computer science, right? So people with computer science degrees who specialize in HCI or user interfaces would do some of these jobs. People who do this user research product manager thing, many people come from a social sciences background, right? So people majoring in anthropology, sociology, psychology is another common one. So another common one up here is psychology. So, cog-sci is pretty adjacent. So yeah, so I wouldn't be concerned that your degree doesn't say design, but your cog-sci degree will have a HCI design specialization if you major in that, which you can put on your resume. And also there's a design minor as well. So that's a good question. Yeah. I think this Figma tool is actually really promising. So Figma is it's actually not that new, but it's really popular. So Figma is basically like Google Slides, but specialized for people who do UI design. It's really good. We use it for our classes, and it's pretty easy to learn, and it basically lets you make. Let me see if I can just demo it this without crashing. See if I'm even logged in. It basically lets you make, I'll show you right now. It basically is a canvas that lets you make mock-ups of user interfaces without writing code. And you can actually do some interactions as well. So this example, this is actually from my class. So in our class, we actually use Figma for everything, and we have the students and the teams. They just turn in everything in the system itself. It's really nice. And where's my stuff? Notes for next. Okay, here's an example. So it's a web-based tool. It's a collaborative tool. Anyone can go into it. The internet here is a little slow. But yeah, I would start with Figma. But I think that the more general thing is that I would start with maybe taking classes here that would do this. Because this is a similar question as the one you asked about the web programming. Like, I wouldn't necessarily start with a tool. I would start with like the project idea, right? But I think Figma is a pretty standard tool for doing this. So let me zoom in here. So with a tool like Figma, you can basically create, it's like Adobe Illustrator and such, but you can basically create these just templates and diagrams and stuff and things. And you can also create these UI elements and stuff to lay these things out. Let me just we'll give you more examples and stuff there. But other questions while I dig up more examples? Yeah, so what should the diversity of projects? Yeah, so I would say, my TA Rajiv actually showed this. I would say just show a few projects, right? So this is a quality over quantity thing. So basically, because people are only going to be able to look at 2 or 3 projects, just show your 2 or 3 best projects, because these case studies are pretty involved, right? Like, you're not going to have 20 of them. So show 2 or 3 and have them written up really well. So imagine these are 2 or 3, essay length things. And where are the components? Oh, here we go. So I think that, the more realistic the project, the better. So this is like Apple Music, right? So this is kind of recreating the Apple Music UI in this Figma tool. And you can just imagine having icons and little buttons and stuff. So you're able to make these sorts of app screens. And there's no code here. and it's really just kind of making prototypes of screens. Yeah, I would say don't worry too much about optimizing for the specific companies. Again, this whole like slide about doesn't really matter what you make, it's really that you made it well. So if you have 2 or 3 case studies that are written up really well, maybe one class project, maybe one side project, one internship project, the most important thing is these things are written up well, right? Like, and that's non-trivial to do. I wouldn't worry about the domain too much, especially if you're applying for these general sorts of undergraduate jobs. Yeah, I don't think so. The question is about, parents or, other relatives. And so, I mean, one example is like if your parents are working for a certain company or they run their own business or whatever, and you're helping them out and stuff, I think that's fine. Like, I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, like, when you put it in your case study, you're probably not going to say this is for my parents. You can say this is for a, like, I don't know, I'm just making this up. Like, so your parents are running a bakery or like, I don't know, a hardware store or something in your town, and you're helping them with their website or helping with something. I mean, your case study is going to be, here's a local hardware store that has these needs, and like, they need to build a better inventory system for their customers, or like the local bakery needs to like work with DoorDash or whatever, and we need to, figure out a better way for it to do it. Yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, you just won't say this is like for my parents, but I think that's perfectly okay. I mean, as long as your parents are okay with it. But this is, again, this whole thing with like, I don't think there is a stigma. I think you should look for those things because, the fact of the matter is a lot of our early jobs, right? I mean, think about, maybe if you're in high school or something and your parents help connect you with their friends to, do a babysitting job or a tutoring job and stuff. A lot of those things came out because of our parents, and that's fine, right? And then you use those as experience and more. So like, I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. Yeah, I mean, like basically anything goes.
Is it on your webpage?
Yeah, I do. I have office hours like every week. Yeah, it's just there's like a Google Calendar. If you look at my webpage, just look at office hours. There's a Google Calendar. So whenever I'm there. Yeah.
Emailing you be more efficient, or
Just go to the office hours. If you email me, I'll just send you the link to the office hours page. Yeah, so it's 1 hour a week, and everyone just comes in. So it's the most efficient. And actually, the office hours is really cool because talking about this whole theme here. The office hours I hold are nice because we have different people come in, and then oftentimes what happens is that people talk amongst themselves and you're actually able to help each other out more than I can, right? Again, like these are the people, like so many times in office hours you come in and you ask about something and then someone else in office hours actually is able to help you out. I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
Great. Anything else before we go? Alrighty, so good luck.